Okay, so I am choosing, these are the things that I am choosing to focus on in my main sculpture. I've chosen a theme of social distance. My compositional device is going to be active negative space. This made a whole lot of sense to me because I feel like, all the teachers have been on campus here, and we're all working in our own classrooms, but there are situations where we do have to interact with each other. Maybe we have to go in the office to get stuff out of our box or use the restrooms or just talk to each other. So we're constantly navigating our negative space, right? Like, how do we stay 6 feet apart? If we have to exchange things, how do we do that safely? Mr. Vetter and I, of course, share classrooms and we share art supplies. So we've had to figure out how to be safe with our interactions. And when we go out into the world, right, we have to navigate each other's negative space. So I thought that was really, really a fitting one, having to do with social distance. So I'm going to be focusing on that. I'm going to be using the coil and the pinch technique. And then I'm not quite sure about this yet because I think I have to finish the sculpture before I settle on it. But I'm just imagining that maybe some really interesting textures where I stain and then I paint and I scratch away with this graffito technique. And then, of course, brushing is always kind of part of it, right? Because you need to get the color on your piece. So remember, we're doing these things with acrylic paint. Okay, so I'm going to start off with those ideas. Got my board. I'm going to grab a piece of paper.
Miss Gretterton,
Yeah,
when would you recommend we paint our sculpture?
when you're done sculpting it.
Or how long do you think it would take to paint it?
Honestly, the painting, it depends on how detailed you get. Like if you're just doing simple techniques where you're painting and scratching away at it, maybe an hour. But if you're doing pattern and detail, or you're trying to paint something that has a lot of, I don't know, value to it, like highlights and shadows and stuff, you might want to give yourself a little bit more time. So I'd say it's probably pretty safe to try to finish your form before the day of the final. And then maybe
Okay.
use the day of the final to finish painting it, photograph it, and submit it.
Okay, and we have to buy our own paint, right?
Yeah, and you can if you don't have acrylic paint and you can't go buy it, just talk to me. Maybe we can come up with a different strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. This is all sort of a moving pieces situation, this distance teaching. Um, never really know when you guys are going to be back here, if we can fire things, if we shouldn't fire things. So we just chose to be virtual for this first exhibition because we weren't sure. And I'm really glad we chose that because, we just found out last week that we're not coming back on the 4th. So now we have a plan for how are we going to display and share these pieces with the public virtually. All right. So I'm just going to grab off some wet clay here. I want to get a sense from you guys by the end of the semester how much clay you have left because I need to pass more out to you for next semester. So my plan in my head was that I'm going to make 2 forms. You don't have to make 2, but I thought it would make sense to make 2 since we're talking about social distance between 2 forms. And then I'm going to coil up 2 hollow but solid looking forms. And then I'm going to let them set up a little bit, which means I'm going to let them dry a bit. And then I'm going to start cutting negative shapes into them and finding out how they kind of work together. So that's sort of my basic plan. Of course, that's probably going to change as I'm working. Let's get a nice wedged piece of clay here. All right, so coiling involves making coils. So I'm just going to make a bunch of coils. And I'm just going to make them long to start with because I can cut them down and kind of use what I need. And I want to pinch it too. So I'm going to leave these coils pretty thick so that I have the capacity to pinch. I don't even necessarily need a base. I can just start building up a coil wall if I want to. This is the kind of sculpture where you're just going to have to sort of take a leap of faith and let the materials kind of dictate. Because I'm not even having you make a drawing of this, you guys. So this is kind of all instinct and working with the material and an idea. Okay, so I've got 4 coils here. And I'm just going to start with a form, and my form can be figurative. It can be, it doesn't have to be. It's really just kind of what you want, what feels right. So I'm going to start maybe with a wider base. Remember, we don't want the whole, we want the whole thing to be 10 inches or less. So if I'm making 2 forms and they're going to interact somehow, I shouldn't make it too big. And we're going to still use all of the techniques in terms of attaching things. Of course, we're sort of simulating ceramics, right? So we have to learn how to do the techniques even though we're not firing these pieces. So I scored, I slipped. Now I'm compressing and pinching. And this is where I can have fun with the way that I sculpt that wall up. So I have this nice thick coil, I can start pinching it up. You can make your coils even thicker than this and have it just pinch more. It's really up to you. Okay, and then I'm going to score this. This is where you want to start working on a board with some paper. Take this coil, score it, my trusty fork, my water, and now I'm going to overlap my scored area onto my scored area, and as I'm overlapping, I'm pinching it on there and I'm compressing. And because I'm working with the, gravity and weight here, I have to, I think it's probably smart for me to kind of taper up as I go. This clay is super wet. Then I'm going to kind of go around and really pinch it closed. Start thinking about texture and form. I could get in there with maybe a paddle, start shaping it. Now if you wanted to do slabs and you wanted to work with leather hard slabs, you're going to have to roll out the slabs first and let them set up or dry a bit before you cut into them and start building with them. You could work with wet slabs as well. Can't build as fast with a wet slab because it's going to flop, but this is kind of my preferred building technique. I like to make fat coils and pinch them up. I feel like I have a lot more control over my form when I do that. And this is where I can start to really think about, well, how do I want this to, that this is a figurative element and it's going to be interacting with another figurative element. Maybe I want it to undulate a little bit. Maybe I want parts to kind of go in like this, and maybe I want parts to kind of go out. This is where I can sort of decide on the form when it's pretty wet like this. I'm not going to cut out any shapes yet for negative space because it's not strong enough, but I can change the wall. I'm not going to deal with texture yet or anything like that. I'm just thinking about form right now. And I think before I build this up too much, I'm going to start my second one, because then I can figure out a way for it to interact, right? We're talking about active negative space. So active negative space is not the negative space that's kind of around the outside of a sculpture, but it's more about the negative space that is interacting with another positive space and how that can become its own shape. So this is active negative space right there. So this sculpture, I want to kind of respond to this one. Again, you do not need to make two. This is just my idea. I think in order for me to have active negative space, I need to have two forms. Everyone's going to have their own way of dealing with their device. So I'm coiling and I'm pinching, and I'm just going to continue to build it up until I feel like it's sort of a complete form for me. You should be actively working on this during class today, Wednesday's session, and also Thursday's session. So you should be able to finish your form by the end of this week. But that means you have to really focus and work actively during class on these things. So I'm going to continue to work on this and demo, and I want you guys to go get your clay and look at your number of stage 1 submission and answer those questions, and then get started on your work for today. Okay, I don't want you to waste any more class time. I will be here to answer questions if you have them. Feel free to turn your cameras off if you want to. You're going to come back at 11:40 to submit a WIP and do your checkout. If you have a question right now, please just use your voice, because I'm not monitoring the chat at the moment. So at some point I'm going to have to stop working on this and let it dry a little bit, because it'll get floppy. But I could probably get away with building this in one session, because it's not going to be too big, right? 10 inches in one direction means height or width. So if this is my total width here, this is about 10 inches right there. So I also can't go higher than 10 inches. So I could probably get away with building this entire form in 1 hour, or like 40 minutes, one session. Just have to be kind of able to sort of jump in with my theme. might want to start thinking about too, as you're sort of pinching and coiling and forming, is okay, what is my surface technique going to be? What is that going to look like? If I want to do staining and sgraffito, I need to have some texture, but I also want some smoothness to it so that I could scratch into it. It might be kind of fun to have one of these forms kind of like overlap and then like encroach. You know, just because this is about social distance doesn't mean it is about adhering to social distance rules, right? Like, how do you feel when someone gets someone that you don't even want in your personal space, in your little bubble of 6 feet? How do you feel when they get in there and without like asking you if it's okay? Um, like, what does that feel like in an abstract sculpture? So you could have one form kind of like leaning over towards the other one, and this form kind of like backing up, saying like, "Whoa, back off. You're in my space." So that might be an interesting tension in the sculpture. And they don't have to be closed. Like, I could leave them open. I think I want to have this one kind of coming up and maybe going towards entering this one's space, like external space and maybe even internal space. Like, there's an interesting thought, like, what is an invasion of your space? So I think I'm going to work on building this one up. And these are all things that I'm thinking about as I'm working. These are not things that I even had in my mind before I even started building these two sculptures. Now all of a sudden here they are because I'm working with the clay. Kind of taking a leap of faith that something is going to happen when I'm making this piece. Some discovery is going to happen. If you find yourself overthinking it too much, try to stop yourself from doing that and just continue to work with the clay. Let the clay answer the questions for you. I know that sounds super hippie, but we are making clay here, sculptures, so I think we're allowed to be a little hippie about it. If your sculpture is structurally sound, you can go pretty far with building it. So I'll give you a little bit of a 360 on what I'm making here. So this one is obviously dominating, and it's kind of like getting into this one's space. And by doing that, it's creating this active negative space in there. It might be fun to like really think about if this one's the aggressor and this one isn't, then maybe making the textures on this one a little bit more intense, like bumpier and, I don't know, something aggressive about the texture kind of coming, and then maybe this texture on this one is smoother and maybe a little bit more like delicate. So I'm getting close. I'm going to actually measure this just to see. Yep, this is about 10 inches, so I can't go taller than this. And it doesn't have to be 10 on both sides. I could cut it off here and just, be done with the height, and then focus on the texture. I think I need to finish this one off a little bit more too. I'm not quite satisfied with that one. I feel like I needed to finish this one first. I'm going to leave it open because I like the inside, but I do want it to feel like it's encroaching on this one. There's a lot of clay artists out there that, you know, they're not in the business of refining their pieces. They actually really take advantage of the textures that happen when you're working with clay. You know, the finger mark and the pinch mark and the rips in the clay and all of the things that happen when you're working with clay that could be really interesting part of the material. And you could kind of capitalize on that, or like maybe, you know, use your finger mark to create a texture. In fact, I'm going to just go for it. Do this all over my sculpture since it's nice and wet. I can still kind of cut into it with my finger. And all of these marks are kind of like moving towards this one. Kind of like a wave, like a tsunami wave. And then think about your Snapseed and all the photo editing options. You could double exposure image this with another, you know, shot of something else. You could really, like, how are you gonna get your theme across even more by the way that you edit your photo and how you photograph it. So you can kind of see what I'm doing here with the textures. Just taking my finger and I'm just scraping. I mean, I've only been demonstrating for how long's 20 minutes, and I've already made most of my sculpture here. So this is, I'm not expecting the Mona Lisa. I want to see emotion in these pieces. Even if you're frustrated at Miss Greninger because she's giving you final projects that take time and energy and work, maybe take your frustrations out on the sculpture. And just be grateful that I didn't give you an actual test or a paper. You get to punch the clay instead. This is looking kind of like a seashell to me. Something in the ocean. And then I still plan on really cutting into this when it dries a bit and giving it some more negative space. I can even maybe plot out where I would do that by pinching and how I'm poking it. Okay, so I feel really happy with this one here. Now I need to work on kind of how it interacts with this one. This one I want to be a little softer. Maybe it looks floopy, you know, like really thin, and pinch the edges thinner, make it look like it's being blown over, about to fall over. And it's kind of leaning this way, saying, don't come into my space. I might leave the base a little thicker just to hold the weight, but give it the illusion of thinness up here. Delicate, delicate. Can go in with maybe a sponge later and make it thinner. I'm think about how am I going to photograph this in an interesting way since there's so much going on here. Making these edges as thin as I possibly can. And then I could even go in after it dries a bit and carve it even thinner or wipe it down even thinner. So you can see sort of the contrast between this and this. And I want this one to feel like it's pushing this one. See, look at this negative. This is what I was really, this is the most important part of the sculpture to me right here. This active negative space between these two forms and the contrast between the roughness and the aggressiveness of this one and the delicate smoothness of this one. Almost feel as though this is a force that's maybe pushing this one. That's why there's this sort of triangular shape. Okay, so 25 minutes in and I feel like I'm almost done with my form. What else am I going to do to it? Well, I'm going to let it set up a little bit, dry a bit, and then I might do some carving in, maybe smoothing of this edge here, make it more delicate. Maybe get a tool and do some gouging in some more in this space here. And then before it dries, because I want to do some sgraffito, I'm going to get my acrylic paints out and I'm going to paint them both. And I'll probably do some sgraffito on this one and maybe some like color fades on this one. You can start thinking about things like color, right? And in your edited photos, I want your pieces to have color to them because we're taking the time to paint them in color. So I don't want your images to be black and white. I want them to be color. They can be grungy looking, but just make sure we can see the painting that you did. So then I want to think about color relationships. Like this one, you know, could be like darker, muted tones or bright, aggressive colors like bright red and bright neon colors. Like if you have some neon paints, that might be kind of fun. And make that kind of aggressive here, and then maybe the tones and the colors here could be softer, like warm colors, or maybe even cool colors are softer to you. Okay, so this is 25 minutes in, and I've got my sculpture almost finished. Now I don't expect that of you because I do want you to take the whole week to make this. But it is definitely doable. And remember, we have to kind of shift our outcome. Our outcome is not this sculpture in the third dimension. Our outcome are the photographs of this sculpture and how we convey our theme and our device through this. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and wash my hands and I will be right back.